Yes, it's Alicia. Hi.
Alicia, hi. Jessamyn, it's actually a super pleasure to meet you after looking at your work the past few weeks.
It's the same here, Jessamyn. I mean, I got the chance to read through your bio and browse through your website last night, and I got so excited just listening, just listening to the videos. And I'm pleased. It's my pleasure to meet you as well and to be here, having this conversation that we're about to have.
Okay. I started my career as an artist over 20 years ago in photography, and much more like a formal context of photography. So, I mean, most of my art books are photo based,
Ah.
and I started getting more interested in photography that documents conceptual performance pieces like Vito Acconci and Sophie Calle and things like that. And even like Cindy Sherman and Nan Golden to some degree. But I really was like interested in telling a story. And that was something that really resonated with me actually about your statement about telling a story. And I was thinking about how the life experiences I've had have really shaped the kind of work that I've made. Life is messy and
Yes.
difficult and challenging, and I think through my years, I mean, I'm in my early 40s now, and I feel like through the years I've really learned to adapt, especially as a parent, to adapt to the circumstances of just whatever's handed me. And so I really feel like that silver lining is always something that I'm looking for in the work that I make. And so the physical, literal works end up being less and less literal photographs, physical photographs, and more the just ephemeral experiences that I'm having when I, for instance, when I found and followed the woman who stole my identity in 2015, that was very much a like response to like a circumstance that I couldn't control, and very similar in a way to the work I did for 10 years about my family. And I was really concerned with class and the poverty that I came from, and the hard work that went into getting a degree, and a degree in art, which is normally for the very privileged. And so for me, I'm always interrogating issues around class as it pertains to me. But also like hoping that it resonates with a wider group. So that earlier work was very much like a photographic exploration of class. And then later on, the sort of interactive performative aspect of following this woman, following my estranged father. And now I am working as a private investigator. So I teach, but I'm also a private investigator, which seems like a really unlikely combination, but the work I do as a private investigator is very similar to scholarship or academic research and things like that. So it's pretty, and even like journalism, so it's really right now where I'm at is finding the space, like where is it art and where is it performance? And I find that for me, the telling of the stories is really important part of the work. So I think that's a big space where we overlap. And I have lots of questions about your, like, what led you to choose painting to begin with to tell stories. I just feel like it's so, like, stories are so complicated and words are so important, and yet you use objects and color and all these other signifiers to tell these stories. Do you think that simplifies it, or do you feel like it makes it even more complicated because you're distilling it down to these specific things?
Well, before I answer that question, let me just give you a little background of, myself and how I came about making the work that I'm making now, because it's been a long journey. But originally I'm from Jamaica. So I went, I did undergraduate at Edna Manley College in Jamaica. Very exciting times, met a lot of people. I grew up in the country. So the transition from the country moving to the city was very wide, like eye-opening. It was also exciting and daunting at the same time. But the culture there, even though it's the same country, a small island, the culture of moving from, I grew up in St. Anne in, as I say, Jamaica, and I moved to Kingston, which is the capital of Jamaica. Now the city was so different from what I'm used to growing up in the country, where it's more laid back, you know, everybody. And just moving to art school was good. The challenge was good. And I met so many people from different backgrounds. So then it was really a shock to me, as a matter of fact, to realize that there are people. So you mentioned socioeconomic status and just different social structures. I think when I moved to Kingston, that's when I really realized that you had people who were very rich. And, you know, at that point, I was trying to figure out where exactly did I fit in, because I could hardly pay my tuition costs and all of that. So initially, when I applied to Edna Manley, I wanted to major in painting. However, because I lacked the funds, my parents didn't have the money, we couldn't afford anything like that. So I had to switch to do art education. Mm-hmm. So for years, I taught for over 10 years, but I always wanted to just paint. So not until very, very recent that I decided, you know what, I'm just gonna resign from my teaching job. So I finished not grad school, but I finished undergraduate at Edna Manley, and I was teaching for almost 10 years. Then I decided I really needed to go and do my graduate program, and I wanted to really focus on painting people. I'm a big fan of people. I love looking at people. I love the fact that people teach me so much about myself as well. So I decided to apply to grad school, and that's when I attended New York Academy of Art. And so, you know, after graduating from Edna, going to art school in New York, before I went to New York, I was making these paintings about these women that I would see on the streets of Kingston, who are, you know, are different, so, like they have their own culture, like a subculture of women. And I got so excited. So to make a comparison to what you do, as in following, you know, like following that woman who stole your identity, following your father, you know, just trying to get an idea of who these people are. I was so pulled in by the subculture of women. Like they'll just be on the street, the way they dressed, you know, they dressed as if, and these are people who are from a poor, you know, poor class, poor group of people. And even though I don't like those terms, because I don't necessarily like to, you know, I don't see myself as poor either, but there was just something that pulled me in about these women, and it was mostly women. And being from a background, I have a family of mostly women. I have no brother. I have 6 sisters, no brother. So yeah, so there's always this energy and my attraction to women. But these women in particular, even though they were poor, they were so creative in the way, and strong in the way they presented themselves. They were hardworking, working on the street. You know, at that time I was looking at hairdressers. So what I did, I documented. I would, of course, I have to ask, you know, their permission to take pictures. And as a matter of fact, I looked at it as a performance in a sense where, you know, you're at home, you're one thing, and then when you're on the street, you put on all this, you know, like your costumes, and even your mannerism changes. So that got me really excited, and I started to just explore and visit these women, and I would try and be a part of their space. But what I noticed and realized is that no matter how you try to be a part of someone else's story, it's almost impossible, because you're just not from that space.
Yeah, you're always an outsider.
You are, exactly. So I started to look and explore how people observe each other, because even while I was visiting these women and just observing and having a conversation with them, they knew I was not from their space, you know. So they would say to me, "Oh, you're an uptown girl," you know, like that is something that we say in Jamaica, "You're an uptown girl," or "You're a downtown girl." And it was so interesting, because I've never lived in an uptown neighborhood, or I don't belong to. Yeah. So yeah, it's exciting to see in that you're in one space and you have people who are so different, even though you're all in the same space. And then to add to that, you know, being from Jamaica, a country that is, you know, was colonized and still, you know, goes through the transition of, being independent, there's so many symbols or aspects of, our colonial past that we still, not that we hold on to because we should, but because we have no other choice.
Yeah.
So, like the later works now, I'm looking at how I'm making a comparison with those women that I started to just explore and observe and watch and document. I'm looking at their story and now making it a bit more personal. So as you mentioned, like thinking about your father and watching him and just trying to figure out who you are through this person.
Yeah.
And through his story. Mm-hmm. Now I'm looking at my family, and it's one of the most, not daunting, but it is so raw. It's such a vulnerable thing to do, like to look at yourself.
Yeah.
And then when you look at other people, you realize that you're no different from them because you're all a part of that same cloth, So that's a mouthful, but
no,
I'm guessing, yeah, like the way society is designed, it tells you to be one thing, but you're not, and you can be. But in the same space, we all have things that we share in common. Like when I was watching your video and you were talking about, just watching your father and listening to your background story, it was so, it pulled me in so much. Like I didn't realize I would have that connection. Like I went to bed even thinking about it because I did not have a good relationship with my father either growing up. So I guess from that I could make that connection. And I think maybe because of our background, it makes our work, it comes into our work, it infiltrates through the work that we make, no matter what we do or try, or try not to, in order for it not to appear in it. But it's so much a part of who we are. And, we're always on the quest to figure out who we are, and we are not by ourselves. It's a combination of all the people that, we come in contact with, the relationships that we don't have with people or that we do have with people, whether they're, in our family or just a friend. So, yeah, that's pretty much, what my drive is. And I'm always looking at how society try to, like break up people. Like we put them in groups.
Yeah.
And labels, yes. But at the end, in the end, we're all in the same story. Yeah. We're all in the same pot that's, being cooked, and, some get out, some stay in. But yeah, it's very interesting, just even thinking about how you paint someone, because there's so much, like the persons that I normally paint are people who I would just see on the street, and there's something that just compels me to just ask them, can I paint you? Can I make a portrait? Mm-hmm. And because I was so in love with faces, I'm still in love with faces and people, and how, just an eye, just the way the eye is positioned, the way the light is hitting someone's eye, that it tells so much about the person that makes me want to learn how to capture that. And that's why I decided to, attend the New York Art Academy, because I really needed to learn how to paint someone to make them look as realistic as possible. And I'm so happy I did that, because I learned so much from that institution. Mm-hmm. And right now I'm just trying to keep that momentum going of, being an artist, something I've always wanted to be, and just portray people and tell their stories as well as tell my own story, So that's pretty much it. I think maybe I spoke for the entire hour. Did I?
Oh, not at all. No, I'm like riveted. No, I mean, there's so much overlap as I'm listening to you. Like, so much, and so much is coming to my mind too, for me, just like personally. I mean, I know art is connected with everything. I tell my students that art is inherently political and life, just the act of doing it, you know, is something,
Yes.
it's a statement, an identity of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
yet I'm having these conversations with fellow artists, and my husband is an artist as well, around what does it mean to be an artist in a capitalist culture where
Yeah.
we're conditioned to the value of who we are, and our identity is really judged and based on the value of dollars or the house or the car. And for us, for me, and it sounds like for you too, having grown up in a condition where we were also, you know, we couldn't value ourselves on the money we had. And of course, like as a young person, I always wanted to have the fancy sneakers, or wanted to have the a car, or, you know, whatever the things were. But, you know, I remember my mother really clearly, like she was so great in really instilling in us that we are grounded in who we are if we stay grounded in who we are, and we know ourselves, and we're true to ourselves, and pursue whatever our dreams and our thoughts and hopes are, and not focusing on a career or on you know, she never supplied me with the skills to go to college, for instance. That wasn't really something she valued, but she supported me when I decided I wanted to do that. You know what I mean? Not financially, but
yeah, which is good. I mean, similarly, my mother, again, we grew up in the country.
yeah,
And of course, most people wanted their children to excel, and she supported me as much as she could until she died. You know, she did support me, and she was excited about the fact that I went to college. Whether I was pursuing art or whatever it is, she trusted me, and she knew that I was determined, and I knew exactly what I wanted. So that was always a push, you know, and that's something that kept me focused and still keeps me focused today, where I'm not pulled into, you know, all the politics of what an artist should do, the type of work that I should make. I'm truly making work that I want to make, you know, and that is something that I want to stay true to, you know, no matter what circle I become a part of.
Yeah.
And pretty much I also like to not be in a circle. I like to be, you know, pretty much by myself.
Yeah. I mean, I find that like the fluidity of our in-betweenness, for me anyway, I feel like I am able to really navigate different realms, different worlds. I mean, I've studied with like law enforcement and people I never would align with politically, but like to learn the techniques and skills I need. And then I've aligned with and studied with, you know, conceptual performance artists who have like wild and crazy lives where they tour all over the world and party. And, you know, like I feel like I feel like a coyote in some ways, like moving in between worlds, where I feel fortunate to be able to do that actually. And obviously, like, I feel really privileged, like I'm able to do the work I do with surveillance. If I weren't white presenting, I would never be able to creep around and follow people and blend in, and, you know, people would automatically have suspicion. So I'm like really grateful to be able to look at what the specific person I am, who I've become, and the priorities and values I hold to be important are in part obviously influenced by the world around me. I mean, we share cells with each other. Like we are literally part of each other in this world.
Definitely.
And at the same time, and so if we can't be able to, like, I love your description of moving through the spaces in the city and meeting people and talking to people and wanting to paint them. And I mean, I feel the same way when I meet people. I'm just fascinated. I want to talk to them. And I'm like turning into my mother, where like, you can't go anywhere without talking to someone, you know, like I'm very social. It sounds like you are too, but at the same time, I need my alone time. Like I need my time to like process, you know.
Of course, we all do.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm so jealous of you right now, where you get the chance, you know, like even to investigate. Like as I said last night, I was thinking about being in your world and just moving around and meeting all these people and doing the documentation. like even going through the images of, like the files that you would get. I mean, I know you're not able to show all the information
Right.
from the files, but that form of documentation, I think it is such a visual language in the sense that it is an art form. It's no different from me browsing through an art book and getting the resource that I need from it. So that kind of combination and meeting all these different people from different spaces, that is, you have gold right there, I think.
You could make a lot of paintings. We should collaborate.
Of course.
I actually have a friend, Dorielle Kamey, who's a pretty amazing
I love her work. I know her work.
Photorealist work.
Yes,
she's pretty known. And she and I we were just talking yesterday about this piece that she and I collaborated on at a gallery in Santa Fe, so she kind of commissioned me to do a piece where I followed her without her knowing. Like I would just like try to find her and photograph her so she could make paintings from them. I mean, we never we never saw it through, but I still have the photographs of her, and I was like, maybe I should send them to you and you should take a look. But
that's exciting.
They're all like these, and they're nothing like what she would normally paint, because like you, she's very clear and specific about these like identity markers and are signifiers, and that's something I really like. I really envy painters because they have a studio. If they have a studio, they go in. And
I don't have a studio, I can tell you that.
And you spend the time making the work, or you can draw. I mean, that there's a specific outcome, a product that you need, you're working towards. And one thing I know I've seen Dorielle kind of grapple with, I know she's selling prints, she teaches classes. Like, how do you kind of grapple with what maybe the audience might want, or who you want your audience to be, and then what the work is that you're making? Because I hear you saying like how you stay true to making your work, and I think that is absolutely the most important thing. And I was literally just telling Dorielle that yesterday. But I know that, like, for me, I don't have a pressure to sell my work as a product. And so I wonder, when you left your position as an educator, what kinds of concessions, or what have you, just from a practical standpoint, I'm wondering, and how does that affect your, or shift, or does it, the work you make?
Well, the trajectory of my journey that I planned out has totally shifted. Like you mentioned, you're a mother. Like recently I became a mother, and a lot of things.
Huge.
That I had, oh yes, it's such a big change, and it's very difficult, that's for sure, to practice, to keep up with selling the work and all of that, which is such a big struggle for me right now. So again, luckily I have family who I can lean on, because that's what I'm doing right now, where I'm just living with my sister and her family until I think brighter days are here, get here. But what that has allowed me to do is to make work. Like when I was teaching, I used to paint as well, but it was so difficult because you give your everything. Like I'm the person where I give my all to whatever I'm doing. And as a teacher yourself, you're giving so much to your students, especially when you're teaching art.
Yeah. So much comes up.
Yeah,
like
there's
so
a lot. There's
stuff.
a lot of, yes, plus all the other responsibilities, because I was teaching at a college for about 4 or 5 years after I completed grad school. And just the demand, what was required of the college from me, it was so overwhelming. And I was not happy, to be honest. So I just made the decision. I said, you know what, this is what I want to do. And, I'm still going to make what I want to make. And that's what I've been doing. So I don't think pretty much about what people would want to buy. I just make what I want to make. And, I'm very optimistic in that. I'm an optimist in that sense, where I make what I'm making. And, if it do get sold, then yes, I'm happy, of course. But I think as an artist, like that like thinking about who's gonna buy and what's it gonna sell, I think it actually interferes with you being, honest in what you're making.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, but I mean, the reality is there, where you still have to maintain your practice. So I mean, recently I just put out some prints. I've never done prints before, and just watching and seeing what everybody else is doing, I decided, let me try to put some prints out there. So
Are they
that's
doing?
pretty much. Well, I've sold a few, to date, and I still have some available, but the struggle is real. But I'm so busy taking care of my son as well that, I'm not as in tune with everything that's going on, because I think that is just too much to take on as one person, and as a creative person too, like everything affects us, and it affects our process, how we think, how we make. So I'm just working and hoping that eventually, there will be a break for me,
Yeah.
But yeah, that's pretty much what I have to do.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like this is something I've been giving a lot of thought to lately in the isolation of quarantine, is like staying grounded. And I recently I've removed myself from social media enough to just take a break from all the external judging that I feel. I mean, it's not like it's even real most of the time, but like that I take on. And I found that like in this sort of like grounding of who I am, I can have confidence that and this is, again, I'm in my early 40s and I'm just coming to this. So I wish I'd come to this as a younger woman, but I feel grateful. After my mom passed 2 years ago, it was a huge event in my life. And since then, I've really found the joy in the everyday in a way that I thought I had before. But if you're rushing from minute to minute to try to like make your career and then also raise a child and then have meaningful relationships, it's like, it's not just the painting or the photographs or the, it's not just anything. It's all of the things.
It's everything. Yes.
If you say yes to everything, when I was saying yes, I was realizing I had to find what I was saying no to, like I had to figure out, if I say yes to this, that means I'm saying no to
something else.
With my son to whatever, so I think it's really like important now that I mean, in my 20s, I felt like because I was so just on my own and focused on being on my own, I could be in the dark room for hours and out, like days. I would just camp out in there and work. And I miss those days. I dream of those days, but I'm not in those days now at all.
Exactly.
And I wouldn't want to be. I'm in my garden, I'm walking my dog. I'm playing video games with my son, like that. Those are part of the practice too. I mean,
it is, of
just
course.
Like reading, like living life, like you taking walks and like meeting people, like that becomes part of the practice. And I don't see how I get the pressure, especially in academia, to make art be a box, a career,
a certain thing,
choice, a certain thing. But really, I think as artists, we know that it's all integral. It's like it's very patriarchal, I feel like, to put it in a box, and it's like, I don't fit in that, but I really admire your ability to walk away from the teaching. I love what I do, and I'm really grateful for the job I have, but I know full well if I had the ability, the whatever, I don't know, the chutzpah to like just only do my art, like I would. And that was actually part of the motivation of becoming a private investigator, is that I could make money doing this thing.
That's good.
Without having to sell, so it's like a service, so it's a fine line.
I am really drawn to mimicry. It could be mimicry, it could be camouflage, and this is coming from my culture in Jamaica, growing up, learning that we were colonized by the British and colonized by Spain as well at one point, and how these different cultures have impacted on our identity as Jamaicans, whether in the past or present, and just the the way we transform, how we adapt, how we survive. We were looking at, you know, enslaved Africans, because, you know, we're part of that heritage as well, where, you know, a group of persons were brought to a certain space and we had to survive. Well, not me having to survive, but, you know, my foreparents had to survive. And looking at how that history helped to form who we are, who we see ourselves culturally now in Jamaica, not necessarily in Jamaica, but as Caribbean people, because we share similar, you know, heritage. But I'm drawn to this idea of how we survive using mimicry. And what I've done is that I've started to research on how insects and animals and, you know, nature does the same, use the same device to survive. And looking at, you know, the overlaps with how people do the same thing. So culturally, I look at how we dress in Jamaica and where these ideas come from. So hence, I make comparison to art history, where I use like elements, clothing, like from like the Tudor style, the Elizabethan period, the way they adorn themselves in, you know, heavily adorned in rough colors. That is, I just find colors to be so fascinating. But using that object as a signifier of class. So if I'm dressed in my rough color, then, you know, automatically, you know, I belong to a certain class. And mimicry is not, I mean, people might see it as a bad thing, but even enslaved Africans use mimicry as a way to survive their, you know, all the hardship that they endured as slaves. They had to mimic the culture of their white slave owners. If they did not do so, then, you know, they would have all, you know, died. And it's a way of creating a new self. When you mimic something, it's a way of creating a new self. It's a way of surviving. Again, it's a way of adapting, and it's a way of feeling like you belong in a space. So in my looking at this device and ways in which people try to adapt using these methods, I see mimicry as something that everyone uses. You know, it's something that we do, whether we are conscious of it or whether we have a particular reason for doing so. But I think if I'm telling a story of myself from the Caribbean, I think that I have to look at the way that we survive, whether to force migration, or if I voluntarily decided I want to go live in a different space, you know. And it's not just an issue or something that is unique to the Caribbean. It's something that a lot of people go through. We see all these people have to leave their homes. Again, whether they're forced or they do it voluntarily, it's a device that is very important to survive. And that's what I try to bring out in the work that I'm making. Like the new pieces that I'm working on now has to do with my family. Like most of my family migrated to the United States, and there's this interrelationship with, or this kind of going back and forth with, you know, different cultures. It's like a marriage of these different cultures, and you have to survive. And in that process of trying to adapt, you know, you become, it's in a sense where your identity is continuously being transformed. It's almost like a performance in a sense. And that is why I'm intrigued with theater. Like I love English theater. I love the idea of creating someone else, or trying to be someone else, and trying to tell the story about, you know, where we're from, who our ancestors are, and how do I relate to other people outside of that space. So that's where my interest started, like just looking at people in my immediate, surrounding, and looking at the way they dress, whether you're on the street or you're at home, like if Jamaicans, the culture of Jamaicans is that we like to dress up, we like to present ourselves, in a way that we feel like, we're making a statement. And it's not just to, as we would say in Jamaica, show off. It's a way of, again, presenting ourselves as somebody or something to be taken seriously. And I think it's a way of even showing who you are, and the multiple facets of who, you are, and all the things that affect you, and how you go about being your own self through all of that, all of that facade, or all of that costume, or whatever it is that you have to adorn yourself with to survive.
Yeah, it's like a way of projecting your identity, and and I think we all have personas that we present in different situations. For sure, I can relate to that too in my work. Yeah, you spoke about the earlier in the conversation about the shift into college life from where you grew up and going from the country to the city. I have a similar experience, and part of the cultural mimicry and shifts I've had to make over the years is like how one from a background that's not familiar with the academy or with degrees or with privilege to make art, even though there's support from my family, like emotionally and mentally, and like, go for it, you should do it, good luck, it was also kind of shocking how the appeal to some of the work that I was making about my family was because in the circles I was entering into, I was mimicking the personality of someone who was of a privileged class. And because of my skin color in San Francisco Bay Area where I studied, I was able to move in that space of like privilege and go to the champagne receptions for the awards or whatever at the museum. And yet the work I was making was very much from me and was not mimicry. It was my real, raw, vulnerable self-portraits and portraits of my family. And so the audience was viewing that raw, projection of identity as the other, and it's very exotic. And so throughout, my pursuit to out of poverty and away from the sort of rural, I haven't lived in a rural area since I left, because in part, I find cities to be so invigorating, and I love walking around on the streets, and I'm like you, I like to meet people, but that's also like strangely one of the ways that I ended up having my identity stolen is by exposing myself and being out there and, having my stuff stolen. And then when I was out in San Francisco in 2011, 2010, I had my wallet stolen. And so then a couple years later, this woman surfaced who is mimicking me. She was like posing as me with the license, and she just was a little older than me and looked somewhat sort of like me, a little bit enough that she could pass. But it was so fascinating to me that someone would want to pass as me, who has massive credit card debt and medical debt and like student loan debt. Like, really, you want to pose as me?
But the interesting thing about that is that even though she was doing something wrong, you mentioned like she was trying to mimic you, as if you are, it's as if you have, it's as if you see yourself as not being that important.
Yeah, but like
that's fascinating, because you see yourself as one thing, you're not that important, but then someone else comes and they don't care whether you have, all of that loan backed up or whatever. They just, and that was a means, and maybe it was a means of her surviving.
Exactly. Too, That's exactly what I was going to say. And what I was thinking when you were talking about the mimicry to survive, that was what I came to learn about her as I explored her life. I wanted to learn about her. And still to this day, I don't claim to know who she is really. I know
Yes.
facts about her, but I've never
Mm-hmm.
met her and spoken with her, interviewed her. There's,
Oh.
you know, so I have seen her, you know, in person, but I've
Mm-hmm.
never made a real, it's only a superficial connection. And that's part of the point of the project that I did about her, Dear
Mm-hmm.
Erin Hart, was Dear Erin Hart is like me writing a letter to her, but also like talking about myself and my own preconceived
Mm-hmm.
notions and judgments. And the more the more facts I learned and gathered about her, the more I realized that she was living a life that was based on her addictions, it seemed, and how she ended up being homeless, how she ended up
Mm-hmm.
being in positions that she needed to serially steal people's identities.
Yes.
And I mean, very smart, very cunning person. And I say that with the utmost respect, but
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't even think to do that, you know? But now as I'm pursuing private investigation, inspired by that process of surveilling
Mm-hmm.
her and all the skills I had to learn. I mean, I guess I thought, how hard can it be following someone, you know? But like, it's so much harder to not be discovered. It does not happen like it does in the movies at all.
Yes.
You know, and there's like hours and hours of just sitting and waiting. I mean, I'm sure too, for the painting process, like hours and hours of just like
Oh.
thinking, processing, looking, surveilling your, you know, and there's a certain amount of surveillance, you know, that goes
Mm-hmm.
into any kind of art practice, I think, in the form of research. But for me, it was literally in an SUV, like watching from when she was
Mm-hmm.
gonna leave or whatever. But in that process, I learned so much about myself, like I said, and my own privilege. And I, up until that point, like I really had thought about her versus me. And
Mm-hmm.
then I started to really, once I did see her and was able to follow her, I started to see how her journey could shape where she was now, you know? And
Wow.
so, I mean, I think I was mimicking a private investigator to get the skills I needed. And then
Mm-hmm.
I enlisted the skills of professional private investigators and then became a private investigator. So like, I wasn't just playing the part. There was something about it that I felt
Right.
like I had to be authentically do that job, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so now I track people who are trying to hide, who are mimicking other people, who are, you know, I'm helping people with their own identity theft and loss of identity. And it's fascinating because it comes in all different forms, you know,
Mm-hmm.
in this culture. It's really about how you can get yours, you know? And I wonder how
Yes.
much identity theft would be a problem if we all had, I mean, for me, it's like I'm a socialist at heart, like a basic
Yes.
income, healthcare, you know, those kinds of things. Because I grew up with a mother who was disabled. She was paraplegic.
Right.
She couldn't work.
Mm-hmm.
But her value to her family and to the culture is like limitless. Like I can't imagine, obviously, she's my mother, like life without
Right.
her. But society would view her as not as valuable, you know? And I don't know, I kind of saw like what the woman who stole my identity, Erin Hart, was doing as performance, like you were talking
Mm-hmm.
about, like
Mm-hmm.
as an act of almost art. I mean, I don't mean to overstate it, but you know, that process was very artfully done. And now
Mm-hmm.
I know, you know, following people, I have to also take on these different personas, and that comes through costume. I wear wigs.
Mm-hmm.
I, you know, do
Yes.
my makeup.
Yes.
Like it's cooler now because I could wear a mask, like just cover my face. You know, and it's like a dream come true. But
Wow.
in that way. Yeah. So now my newest project I'm working on, which you know I don't have a studio, so I don't have access to lighting and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm trying to problem solve, like you were saying. Like we always just try to find solutions. So
Yes.
maybe I'll just start taking iPhone shots of myself. Like I have to go out actually later today and
Mm-hmm.
tomorrow to find this guy for a client. And I'll have to go to a bar, to an outdoor, like seated
Mm-hmm.
area,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and observe. And, you know, I'll have to wear a wig and I'll have to wear whatever clothes. But I like the idea of that in itself is a practice, you know, to do that. Like the dress we have. I mean, I think of August Saunders' works, photographs from Germany in the 20s, where he documented the quintessential like chef, the quintessential that like it was, I mean, it's very problematic work in a lot of ways.
Yes.
But it's also like he was trying to distill it down, right? To like, this is what this type of person,
yes.
you know, whereas you and I are trying to like complicate it, you know, and like explode it out, turn it inside out. And I love that about art, you know, versus documenting. Because
That's
documenting is about the truth, and what we're doing, art making, is about the story, you know?
That's such a good way of putting it, because I'm listening to you and you're saying that getting dressed up and everything to you know, to go out and watch these people, observe them. And that is something to me that is interesting, because you're observing them, but really it's an observation of yourself as well.
Oh,
You know,
absolutely.
that's one of the most um, fulfilling thing, because you know, you're trying to know these people based on their actions. And that's the thing about like making work that is about colonialism. A lot of people tend to feel not just uncomfortable but about it, but I mean, I remember doing an interview some months ago, where the interviewer asked me if I thought that my work was in some way a celebration of, you know, colonialism. And at first I felt, yeah, but the question is good, because at first I felt like, wow, why would she say such a thing or ask such a thing? But it's a good question, because then it gave me the opportunity to look from the eye of someone else who has these, you know, ideas. And it actually makes the work stronger, because now I can, you know, add another viewpoint or add something else to the story. And that's the interesting thing about storytelling. Even as a performer, you're telling a story, and even though everyone in a group can tell the same story, but the way the story is told is going to be so different, you know. And that's because everybody brings their own personality to it, their own background, you know. So even you becoming a, you know, like you're going around watching these people, I'm so pulled in by it. I am so excited.
Hey, maybe, you know, you want to look into getting your private investigator's license, and then you can paint the people you want. I think about that too. And when I teach my students to like, don't worry about people copying you, like just do what's true to yourself. And like, if someone's trying to copy you or doing the same, I mean, I know there's a woman who did a body of work about her estranged father, and she found him and followed him in another country. Totally different work, completely different work. And in some ways it's like really like direct. Whereas what I was doing was very sort of, it was much more a process of finding a portrait of myself, you know. And I didn't know that when I started it, but that's what I brought to it, you know. Like someone could paint, you know, images of people with ruffled collar, you know.
Oh,
but
guess what? There's a lot of artists now that I'm doing it. Like I have friends who would send me images of other artists making works that are similar. And at first, you know, it kind of made me feel, because I like to think that I bring something that is so different. But what you realize is that we're all bombarded by all the same. We're bombarded with similar imagery. And I think that what I have to say about it is so different from what somebody else has to say. So, you know, I keep true, as I said, and I keep working on it, you know, different stories.
Yeah, that's how we stay grounded in like, like who we are. We stay confident, and we know that what we're doing is valuable and that there's enough. And that's a sort of mindset of abundance too. Is like, there's enough for everyone, and that we don't have to, we can decolonize our own art practice by allowing the space that we can all share these different experiences and these different ideas in the different ways that we do. And
of course,
I'm like really curious to see some of the newer work that you're making, and how being a mother, I mean, I know it's cliche and everyone talks about this. Once you're a mother, it's like everyone wants to connect it back to being a mother. But I do feel like for me, it changed my perspective, and I became maybe like, I feel like for me, becoming a mother helped me, my son is 8, but helped me to
Mm-hmm.
create clearer boundaries too, which allowed me to do the work of being a private investigator, because I have to have clear boundaries, not just with the work itself, but with the clients,
Of
with
course.
between the art making.
Mm-hmm.
Some projects are not for the art space, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like they are just
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
very highly sensitive. And I'm curious, like, for you, when, you know, you get to where you're making, I mean, it sounds like you're still making work always, but like
Of
how,
course, yes.
you know, family has shifted, and family is really interesting to you, and it's more directly about your family and just those different identities within, because probably for you,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like we all have these different personas within family, and then with certain, like, I'm different with one sister than the other,
Mm-hmm.
or,
Oh yeah.
you
Oh,
know,
that's
things like that.
interesting that you pointed to that, because like currently I'm living with a sister that I've always felt like the closest to. And I haven't lived with her like for years. So it's as if it's like I'm just starting to know her truly now. So all of that kind of, you know, that relationship that's resurfacing, or that I'm recreating, it's very interesting. And of course it seeps into the work, you know, like I find like I'm more in tune to myself now when I'm making the work, even though I have a limited amount of time to make work, of course, because of my son. But what I find is that with having my son now, I have to set timelines
Yeah.
and I keep to them. And I feel like I get a lot more work done, because
Yeah.
I had a solo show
Same.
in August last year, and I had my son at that time,
Oh,
you
wow.
know. Yes, and I did what, I got 10 pieces done for that show, and some of those are like my most successful pieces.
Mm-hmm. You
So
had to like
you
get
know,
it done.
yes, I'm
Like,
yes, oh
no
yes,
messing around.
I'm like that, yes. Okay, my son just woke up.
Oh, perfect timing. So speaking
Perfect
of
time.
boundaries of time, it sounds like this is a good wrapping point. Oh my
Yes,
gosh.
I
Oh, it's
had
been
such
such
a
a
good time
pleasure.
talking to
Yes,
you.
this is great. Let's do it again.
Of
That's
course.
exciting. And congratulations on, I didn't realize how new your son was. That's really
Oh
exciting.
yes, he's just 19 months, yes,
Oh, wow.
about to turn 2. Mhm.
Oh, congratulations. And
Thank you, I appreciate that.
I really
And
enjoyed it.
all the best with your new adventures too.
Thank
And you
you.
know, yeah,
Thanks.
I'm
You too.
excited about it, and I'm happy I got the chance to hear about it directly from
Too.
you.
Me
Yes.
too. Hi.
Oh my goodness.